Welcome to the Homelab Show, episode 94. More home assistant tips, tricks, and ideas. We
Yep.
talked about this recently, I know, but this apparently triggered Jay into a state of deep research and
Yeah,
focus, I would say. He's
hyper
been
focus.
hyper focused. Jay took this to the next level. So we're going to share some more tips on this, and maybe we'll coax Jay into doing some videos on the topic as well that'll get even more detail. But I think it's worth bringing up because Home Assistant, and we got some news announcement around it we'll talk about too, is really like it just fits in the pocket of not just Homelab, but I would say even a lot of businesses. I'm talking to more people that go, I just don't want to tie things to the cloud. I want to be able to manage and see a lot of data locally. And the amount of integrations you get from this self-hosted app are pretty amazing. So I think it's just such a good fit for the audience here. And it is certainly an endless rabbit hole of fun of automating
Oh, yeah.
everything at a level of detail that's pretty incredible. So it's kind of our topic today, but we have a few other things we're going to bring up as well. As we change the show format up a little bit and bringing this to you, we're going to have a little bit different cadence where we try to bring you some of the updates because there's so many things happening. We want to make sure everyone's
Yep.
aware of some of the new fun features that come out with popular software used in all the Homelab and things to get you started. But before we start all of that, we have to thank a sponsor of the show, and that is our friends at Akamai. Yes, Akamai, formerly known as the like what is it? The artist formerly known as Prince, or the place formerly known as Linode, but there's still Linode DNA in there. They
Yep.
still have been really great to work with. So the Akamai Cloud, great place to host your services, great place to host things that maybe you don't want in your lab, but maybe sit better on that cloud. They give you a lot of services, and those services have actually expanded since their acquisition. So there's even more reasons to use them. Their app store is cool. There's a project me and Jay will be discussing soon that we we won't have it all public yet, but it's all more good stuff and have more knowledge we're going to be dropping courtesy of Akamai. We've been working with them on some fun
Yep.
projects. We do recommend them. We think they've been a great sponsor of the show. There's an offer code down below to get you signed up with them if you're interested. And we thank them for being a sponsor pretty much since the beginning. We're
Mhm.
still happy engaging with them. All
Absolutely.
right. First on our agenda of the Home Lab show is feedback. And this is an interesting question. And I know there can be challenges with doing this. I don't know. I've not tested this as an edge case. It should work. Whether or not you run into any performance problems is the question. And this comes from the user starts with, had a question. Is there any conflict running ButterFS file systems in an LXD container storage pools instance on top of ZFS pools on a storage backend such as TrueNAS? I know I can't nest ZFS file systems due to version conflicts. They seem to run fine and make snapshots more efficient, but can't find much edge cases. Yeah, this is an interesting discussion because when you're doing this, you may run into like an optimization problem, and it was interesting because it was within the last few episodes of the 2.5 Admins podcast. If you're not familiar with them, check out that podcast. It's great, but they had a couple good discussions around ZFS and what happens when you run ZFS inside of ZFS, what works and what doesn't. But there's a lot of weird edge cases of performance that can come out of it, not functionality. Like it seems to work and be stable, but it's kind of like this weird alignment problem. And you are in kind of uncharted territory because they were talking about ZFS running inside of a virtual machine that is also backed by something running ZFS. But the same rules apply. I don't see a problem with it from a reliability standpoint. I don't know how much it would enhance your performance. ButterFS has its own caching mechanism. ZFS has its own caching mechanism. Where the inefficiencies lie or more efficiencies is going to be up in the air. So
Yeah.
what do you think on that, Jay? Kind of the same?
Yeah, for the most part, I feel like it should work, but you run into these weird edge cases, and I think that's the nature of the question where if you have one file system that does things a certain way, they're both copy and write file systems. So I mean that they're in the same category, but how they organize things, if features that work in one may not work in the other, especially with ButterFS, there's some features that aren't considered ready. So I am normally a fan of just, setting up a lab and trying it out. Like if you're curious, just try it. But I think the nature of the question is, are there going to be quirks that you might run into later? And that becomes really hard to test in a lab because there could be an intermittent issue. So for the most part, I would say the LexD container shouldn't, or LexC, whichever it is, shouldn't really notice that it's on ZFS. because it's almost like a VM doesn't always, and most of the time,
Yeah.
doesn't know what kind of storage it's on. But the problem might be with how the two interact with each other. I mean, one way to find out is just to run something not production or something that you depend on, but just run it for a while and just kind of see what happens, run some updates on it and things like that, and just see if anything kind of stands out as weird. I don't
Um,
know if there's any issue, but I kind of tend to want to test that kind of thing.
And I would say, because you can automate your testing and do something a lot more intense and gain metrics from it that are very detailed, is Phoronix Test Suite. And
Hmm.
I've thought about doing a video on it because I mean, it's well known, but sometimes it's weird when people go, "Hey, what are you using?" And I'm like, maybe it's not as well known as I thought. Because to me, Phoronix is like the go-to website, and their test suite is just amazing. And the automation level you can get in it is it's a little hard to set up because their documentation is not 100. It's very technical and
Right.
not step one, step two. Like the base running for Onyx is easy. The automation where you can actually, it has a web interface and not everyone knows that. You can turn on the web interface and build a schedule of all these different things you want to do. And concurrently with other VMs, for example. So you can actually have it like a coordination server where you can say, run Phoronix on these 8 virtual machines that I've set up and at this time, and run them all sequentially or simultaneously. You got different options like that for scheduling, and this can really put a heavy workload on there, give you the metrics back. Because like, let's say we see what happens with 1 VM, 2 VMs, 3 VMs, and then you can go look at the aggregate statistics it gathers, and it produces those really nice charts that are all documented with your notes in them. Because you, for each run, you give it a note, like this configuration is this scenario, and it just does all the nice aggregation work for you, so you don't have to like note this in a spreadsheet. I've used it a lot on my channel, but this is a good way to load test it because you can set up the type of scenarios. And by the way, when you run a Phoronix test for a scenario like building a kernel, it loads and builds the kernel. It doesn't just run a simulated benchmark. It just automates some task like querying a SQL database or
Mhm.
running Apache. It actually runs some of those in the background to give you extremely accurate workload. So it's kind of a fun way to test this. I don't think there's any reliability or risk you have running this, but it's an interesting, what is that edge case where they perform better, or what's the edge case they perform worse? You are in uncharted territory, my friend. And this is what the Home Lab is
Yep.
about.
Yeah, like what happens when you have a ButterFS snapshot and a ZFS snapshot and you restore one and not the other? Things
Yeah.
like that are gonna be potentially interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely I don't have the time to set one up myself, so we'll wait to hear. We don't mind some feedback on it. So let us know how it goes, or if you find something unusual, send an
Yep.
email over to us. Speaking of that, feedback at the Home Lab Show. This is where these questions can easily be sent to us. We still have the form on the site, but people seem to prefer to email us. So that is definitely the way to do it.
Mhm.
Just email us, and we'll take the time to answer the questions. We actually don't have any other questions, so we'll just jump over to the next.
Yep.
Um, which is some updates to some software I wanted to bring up. Now, I haven't done a video on it yet, but there is a new version of TrueNAS Scale Out, which is awesome. They have been working away. I have a bug I want to test before I do my video. I want to see if they solved it. There's a weird encryption performance bug I ran into. So there's a potential for maybe that being fixed. I was vague of whether or not that issue was fixed. The new UI is available for VMware migration in Zen Orchestra. I did do a video on this, and it's pretty cool. And for those of you that are going, I want to get off VMware, but can you make this easier on me? I don't want to do. I mean, we've talked about, me and Jay have cloning and things like that, and that's where they're really putting a lot of effort into this because it's just an easy migration path. You're on your older version of VMware, you connect your Zen Orchestra to your VMware machine, and it then migrates all your VMs to the new machine, and life is good. So,
Without any clonezilla in between.
yeah, matter of fact, especially if you've got like 20 VMs, I mean, I got to admit, if you have 20, 30 VMs and following the process me and Jay talked about with Clonezilla is 20, 30 times more tedious.
Right.
This will actually migrate all the VMs right over. And it's just, it's too cool not to talk about. I've been told, and I don't know, I don't really keep up with VMware licensing. Someone said they increased what they're charging for even the lower tiers for it. But if you're looking to come over to the XCP&G world, hey, why not come on over? They're making it easy and welcoming to do so. So I thought that was pretty cool. And this is also part of the free version. So this is not, if you're wondering when it comes to Zen Orchestra, the question comes up. And I did the demo with the free version to let people know in the Home Lab, yes, you can compile this yourself. Yes, it's fully available and accessible to you without any licensing. Um, then we have HomeSeer. This is another piece of interesting news. Is that um, the HomeSeer is now HomeSeer is now a member of the Works with Home Assistant Partner Program. And I thought
Hmm.
this was kind of neat because this just opens up even more devices that are accessible. So they announced an official partnership. Now, there's a lot of things you could always get working in Home Assistant, but it's even cooler when, and many companies are getting more and more cooperative with Home Assistant because they realize its popularity in the marketplace, which is awesome. And it's just kind of a neat thing being able to tie more and more things in there. I'm actually shocked because someone complained about them being expensive, and you're not wrong. Like, I have some Hughes lights in here, and if you said they're overpriced, I agree with you. But when you find them on clearance at your local hardware store, you go to then all the local hardware stores and you buy all the lights. All
Yep.
my Hughes lights I put around my house, I would not have paid, but I got 80% off on them. So if you can find a deal on Hughes lights, turns out they'll work great with Home Assistant. They actually I gotta admit, they're nicer than some of the other ones I've tried, like InnoValley's. The InnoValley's work, but I find them a little bit more quirky. Even though they're listed as working with them, the updates don't go as smooth, like when you do transitions to different colors compared to
Hmm.
the way Hughes makes a good product, but boy, do they charge for it.
Yep, but I no, yeah, the clearance thing is great. Like I may have raided a number of Kmart's and they were on the final stages of going down and grabbing some things, and I think I got 80% off of some things. So I mean,
Yeah.
nothing beats the clearance deal. I mean, that's the cheapest anything can get. At that point, they just want it out the door. They don't even want to profit. So
Yes. I agree.
yep.
And Jay has some tips though of something we won't declare it 100% solved, but it's something that is a recommended best use case for the when you set up Proxmox and the way it does
Oh yeah.
ChoroSync. So if you can
Yep.
explain that troubleshooting tip that you had for us.
Yeah, so this is something that I've been running into, and I'm going to give a disclaimer. I'm not 100% confident that this is the solution to my problem, but it might be. Sometimes when you run into something intermittent, the only thing that'll give you confidence is just a lot of time passing in between, if it doesn't happen for a number of months or something. But the issue I'd run into is every now and then one of my Proxmox nodes would just drop off the network. And it's been fine for years, and then all of a sudden it's just gone. Like, it's running, but the network card is just offline, and sometimes it's just, frozen. So I never really knew why. I started Googling around, and then someone mentioned that this kind of thing can happen if you don't have the ChoroSync network on its own network. So what I mean is, it's on its own NIC, and in my case, I set it up on a VLAN, a different subnet, and I made it so that, nothing else can see it. But basically, the idea being that ChoroSync is like the cluster network. It communicates between the nodes, and that needs to work so well that you need to have like I think it's like a zero point 0.5 millisecond or something like that, or a very low response time is what's needed to keep ChoroSync happy. But then what happens when you have like a bunch of network traffic? Like, you're backing up a bunch of VMs and you just have bits flying through your cards. And then at that point, it's theoretically possible it could be getting in the way of the cluster network. And if it can't communicate, then some things start to go down. So it all makes sense. So I implemented this. So again, it was just a separate NIC. I have a 10 gig card, but I felt like 10 gig is overkill for
Yeah.
ChoroSync. So I had a 1 gig NIC that was just not used by anything because I think there was like 4 built into the motherboard or something. Um, so I just dedicated a port to this network on each of these servers and then set up a VLAN. And the thing is, you're not going to notice, at least I don't think, any performance improvements by doing this. It's a best practice. By default, everything's on one network. But, honestly, when you get to a certain point, you should probably start separating things. And I think that's what I started to hit because my traffic on the VMs was just getting to a point because it does match when my size got to a certain point. So I'm thinking there's a strong possibility this is it. But even if this is not the cause of my issue, because I even had someone suggest to take a look at the SFP adapters because that can sometimes cause this, but I ruled that out. That wasn't the issue. So then I'm going down this road. But even if it doesn't fix it, it's a best practice. So you're not going to be harmed by having this in place other than, the amount of time
Yeah.
it take you to set it up. But you're only setting up, a very small network for very specific nodes. So basically it should be a little easier than most, I think.
Yeah, and it's just to reiterate, like the going down problem comes probably from Jay oversaturating during his backups on
Right.
there. It's just weird that it doesn't how the recovery works on it because don't you have to reboot the Proxmox to get it working?
Yeah, either the whole thing will be frozen or that 10 gig card will be just off the bus. It's like, "What?" And I think that might possibly mean that it could be something else, but I've replaced the 10 gig card because of this, because I thought, "Well, maybe it's bad." And then it didn't happen for a couple of months until it happened again, so it's like one of those, correlation kinds of things here. But when I looked at, some forum posts, someone else posted having the same problem, and then someone, like, their first reply to that message was, "You probably have CoroSync, on the same network as your main network, and that kind of thing can happen." So, there is definitely reason to believe that this can be caused by that on account of the fact that people in the Proxmox forums will point this out, that there could be erratic behavior if you're sharing these. I would think for most people, you may not run into this, but then again, you could have just the right amount of Plex traffic, for example. Maybe if you just have a weird situation where everyone in your house is in their room and they're all watching Plex at the same time. I don't know. I mean, there could be weird stuff like this that could happen. So if you run into this, it's a best practice. If you have the capability of doing this, if you have an extra NIC, I wouldn't go out and buy one, an extra network card, unless you
But
know for
usually you're
sure. But usually you
yeah,
have an extra one.
usually
So
you
why
have an
not use
extra one. You're like those 1 gigs. I'm not doing anything
it?
with them anyways. So
Pretty much. I mean, with the exception being the IoT network, I use that too on a 1 gig NIC because I figure that doesn't need 10 gig
no,
just to turn on my light
don't.
switches.
Hopefully
So
your IoT doesn't need 10 gig.
that'd be crazy. Well, you know what? With Home Assistant being such a rabbit hole, I think someone in our audience has probably gotten to a point where they need to. I mean, it's doubtful, but it's possible. You
Yeah,
never know.
you never know.
So never know.
Speaking of Home Assistant, Jay, what'd you do to Home Assistant? This-
You mean besides being obsessed with it and kind of like being unable to pry myself away from it and spending too many hours at night to the point where I'm losing sleep? Yeah, that's a rabbit hole. So when I get obsessed with something, all of a sudden I just go. It's like go big or go home. I'm already home, so why not go big? So here's the thing. So I've mentioned a few times that I'm getting more and more caught up. That's a long process, but it continues, and I was able to finish like I think 10 renders in a week at one point. So my editing queue is dropping, but what do I do with that extra time? Well, I've been neglecting Home Assistant. So I decided to really dive in. And I found a couple of things that I feel like people may not know. For some of you, this might be common knowledge, and that it is what it is. But for some of you, you might not know that some of this capability exists. So what I decided to do was redo all of my dashboards. I felt like they're too busy, they're too cluttered, there's too much going on there. And one important thing about home automation, especially if you don't live by yourself, if you have other people, if you have a roommate, a family, or something, and let's just say you want them to use it, but maybe they're not technical like you are, and they kind of don't care, but they do to be supportive. You know who I'm talking about? Like your family member wants to be on the same team as you to show support, but they really don't understand this stuff. But it gets frustrating for them if they're not technical because they're not going to understand, like, why are all these buttons needed? I just want to turn on the lights, right? That's all they want to do. Why do I have to go through all this to turn on lights? So I feel like they call it spouse approval, but it's not just spouse approval. It's whoever you live with that may not want to be bothered with this kind of thing, but might still benefit from home automation. The idea is to keep it simple. As few buttons as possible. That was my challenge to, really get it down to what's required, and also hide the things that aren't necessary. For example, if your TV isn't on all the time, then why have a now playing card on your dashboard all the time if your TV is not on? Doesn't make sense. I mean, but what's horrible about that is you either have the card on the screen or you don't. So you just want to benefit from that, or you don't, but it's either there or it's not. But I found out that's not true. Actually, you could you could add what's called a conditional card, and this is the first tip, where you could literally have an if then statement, and that's how it's shown there. And you can set up, if this is, if this device is on, show this card. So that way you could have a media player app, no, media player card, right? So you have a media player card on your dashboard, and you can set its presence to depend on the media device itself being on. So if you turn it off, the card goes away. You turn on your TV, the card comes up. So I went kind of crazy with that. And I was like, okay, um, rather than having a button for every single light, I'll have one button that controls all the lights. And then when it comes to the TV, you have the card for playing whatever you're playing is there if the conditional check is true. So that helps. But then I've also discovered that you can create a navigation in a normal button. So you can leave the entity blank, and then you could have the click action instead of being a toggle, it could be a navigate to another page. And I didn't know you could do this, but it's just one of the features that's built in. And nothing I've mentioned so far requires an add-on, a plugin, or anything. We're just talking Home Assistant. You add a conditional card if then statement, add something if it's needed, or have it be hidden if it's not. But when you have other menus, you could actually hide the menus from the interface by calling them a submenu in the settings. And this is the second tip I didn't know you could do. So if you set a dashboard as a submenu, then it's hidden and inaccessible from the dashboard. There's nowhere you can click to get to it. But that's great because you can create the button that takes the person to it. So what I did was I set on the TV, for example, a long press or long tap. You just hold your finger on it, hold your mouse cursor on it, and it'll do a different action. So a click will turn it on. Holding down the mouse button or long touch will take you to a sub menu that has all the controls for the TV, rather than having all the controls for the TV be on your dashboard all the time. So what you're doing is you're making it less overwhelming for someone else. I'm sure you, as the person that's designing your home assistant, you know what every button does. And you probably don't even understand why other people think it's complicated, right? It's like, well, what do you mean it's complicated? It's easy. Look, there's a button for each of the 45 things I have in the room. What's difficult about that? But other people look at that and they're like, oh my God, that's a lot of buttons, right? So um, having roommate approval, I don't know what the correct term is, but
Yeah.
um, I should say average person approval is definitely a win for your home automation, because then you get buy-in from the people that live with you. And then it starts to really get to be something amazing, because if you think about it from their eyes, like, I just want to turn on the lights. So, for example, in my home assistant, I'll have one button for all the lights. But the problem is sometimes you want to configure the lights, independently. You don't always want every light on. Sometimes you might want your lamp on, but your overhead light off. So then I set up a menu where if you long tap on the light icon, then you get another menu that gives you individual control of every light in that room, but only when you long press. If you just tap on it, it turns everything on. Tap on it, turns everything off, and then the submenus are behind a long press submenu. And then I created my own navigation menu by just having a series of buttons, hiding the icons, just putting text there. Here's all the rooms, office, den, whatever. And someone sees that on Home Assistant, they see a menu. Easy. Oh, I want to turn on a light in the den. It says den. I'll tap on den. There's a big light icon there. And that's the only icon there. I'll tap on that, lights come on. They're happy. If they care about the lights, they could choose an individual one behind a submenu. But these are features I kind of discovered on accident, just kind of playing around with this. And it might not sound like much, but when you think about this, you could really customize your dashboards to be dynamic rather than everything always being visible. And I think that will give you a lot more control over what you have. And speaking of control, here's another tip. If you didn't already know, there's cards available. Again, nothing I'm saying relies on an add-on so far, and that's still true. There's vertical stacks and horizontal stacks. And this really helps because you could have icons or any other cards that are joined together vertically or horizontally, depending on what you want to do. And then you could start embedding conditional checks within vertical stacks. So think of it this way. You have a vertical stack where the top card is the power button for a TV, for example. I'll keep using that example. And then the card underneath is a conditional check to show the now playing when the TV is actually on, but they're in a vertical stack. So you don't have to worry about the power button for the TV being moved all the way to the right, and then the now playing card appearing all the way on the right. Now we have what looks like an actual relationship between the TV button and the now playing button, which is going to be obvious for everyone. Like, oh, I turned on the TV and now there's a now playing card directly underneath the TV button. So that now playing card probably goes to that TV. It just makes sense. And I kind of went crazy with this idea and these features. I'm not sure how well known they are. Maybe everybody listening are like, yeah, we've all known about that forever. But if you haven't known about any of these things, I think that this might be something that could help you simplify your dashboards quite a bit.
One thing I'll note too, and I think in our last Homelab show we only mentioned it, the PF Sense integration is actually pretty slick.
Mhm.
You can have it tied to your firewall rules. You can have it enable disable rules. So if you have something you only want on sometimes, you could use Home Assistant to say, I want to open this up or not open this up, turn this firewall rule on, have the status of your firewall, know if there's any issues like loss and things like that. One thing that how I use Home Assistant and the way you can really think of it is becoming the one place, the thing we talk about in the enterprise world, the single pane of glass that gives us all our data. And Home Assistant really can be that for you. I'm almost done with a video I'll be doing about how I've integrated Home Assistant with my Synology surveillance station, because my wife uses the surveillance station through the app all the time. She doesn't actually go to the DS Cam app anymore. She can see what she wants to see. It can give her notices. She can set things on there. It is it's really cool. And I see someone in the comments here saying this. Yeah, me and Jay both want to make some videos on how we've integrated it to show you, like, in a very visual way, how we've created some of these features. It's just kind of cool.
Yep.
The more I've pulled in there, I recently became among the people to finally get an IoT device. I have a roaming vacuum in my house, and it turns out I'm excited not about the roaming vacuum. That seems to make the wife happy, but I like the fact that I can integrate it into Home Assistant and it will tell me what it's doing. It'll tell me when the bin's full.
Yep.
That's just kind of a novel thing. I haven't done that yet. I want to make sure it works first because it was tricky to set up because security. But
Yeah,
on its own
absolutely.
network, because that's where IoT devices go. So yes, roaming robot vacuums are IoT devices, in case anyone's wondering.
So, in regard to doing videos about this, because this is the topic I'll bring up just so people understand the issue with choosing topics on YouTube. And I think, unless you are really into the YouTube space, you're not going to understand this. Whether I want to make a video or not, I mean, that should be my only deciding factor, right? If I want to do a video, I want to do a video, I'll do the video. But unfortunately, with YouTube, sometimes it forces us to be in a silo, even if we don't want to be.
Yeah.
So I'll give you a perfect example of this, and I'm going to be completely transparent here. So when I reviewed the HP Dev 1, I mean, we're talking like I don't know, 1 or 2, maybe even 3 weeks of testing. I had that very early before it was even announced, so I had a lot of time with it, and I put it through its paces. And the video, I'm pretty sure, got like 30,000 views, I think. Um, so basically, that sounds like a successful video, but I made $20 in ad revenue so far total since that video came out from then until now. $20. Like, that's not even a Taco Bell dinner for the entire family, right? So, but then again, I could create another video that's a tutorial that gets like um, a fourth of the views, that gets a lot of money in ad revenue. It's like, what's going on? So what happens is what YouTube decides is your topic area may not completely align, because in my mind an HP Dev 1 video is perfectly on topic because it's a Linux laptop, but to YouTube it's like, oh, he's reviewing hardware now.
Right.
He normally does tutorials. We're not going to show this or give him any money for this. That's outside of his
It also
yeah.
reduces the views and everything else.
Yep, that too. And
YouTube
I
actually
hate
sends us
that.
a notice when we go outside of our topic. It's a weird
Like,
problem that
shame on you for doing something like that, and it's on topic, it's just they don't know the Linux link. So I guess, what does that have to do with Home Assistant? So, the honest truth is I wanna do videos about it. I probably will, but I can't promise it, because it's possible that if I do create a video about this, nobody will see it because the algorithm won't send it to anyone, because if YouTube thinks that home automation is too far outside my topic, it's just going to decide, well, his audience doesn't care about that, so we're not going to show it to anyone. So it's like it should be my choice, but it's YouTube's choice, right? And I think that's horrible because I want to do this video anyway. Long story made short, I will try to do a video. I can't promise it, but maybe it'll be fun to do an experiment and see if the algorithm accepts my Home Assistant topic or something. It's just a ridiculous thing that we have to deal with.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
maybe, so it's a maybe. I'll
I
do a
hope.
video on it.
I hope.
Algorithm be damned. People want to see it.
I know. It's just, this is the problem with automation and AI. I don't know if it's AI. I have no idea how this works, but sometimes when you have data modeling, it might look a certain way to a computer, but as humans, we'll see a link between two things and we'll know the link and it'll be obvious to us. It's like, oh, Jay, the Linux guy, is reviewing a Linux laptop. That makes sense. I think that's what most people will think. YouTube thinks of it as another way. So, just one of those inside struggles that we kind of talk about in our
Yep.
weekly calls and kind of complain about because it's annoying. But basically, if you don't see Home Assistant videos from me, trust me, I want to do it. I'll probably do it, but we'll see where it lands and we'll go from there.
Yep.
But yeah, it'd be fun to do because I think that's kind of the challenge of a podcast, right? It's one thing to tell people these features exist, but I do feel like a certain subset of the audience is gonna probably not care because if they're a visual learner, they're just not gonna get the picture unless they see it and then it clicks. So, unfortunately, it's kind of hard to paint that picture without actually showing you the picture. And I think that would make a lot more sense if people were able to see it. So maybe one of these days I'll throw together an overview video where I'll just show it. And then if that does well, then maybe we'll go from there. And then there might be more Home Assistant coverage on the channel.
Yeah. So if we do it, make sure you watch it because that helps the
Yep.
YouTube algorithm know that that you should watch it, that we should make more.
Yeah, yeah. Just spam that F5 button. Don't do that. Don't do that.
They probably know.
They know about that. They're not that stupid, but if only, right? But yeah, sometimes I mean someone in the chat was saying, what if you say HA on Linux or Home Assistant on Linux or something like that?
I think that's
There is some truth to that
yes.
because here's the thing. If I do a review on a piece of hardware, it results in less ad revenue and also fewer views. But if let's just say, for example, I'm reviewing a Raspberry Pi product and I phrase it as a review, it'll it won't do as well. But if I make the same video but spin it as a tutorial, a project, then it's going to go crazy. But it's the same content.
Yeah.
you know, it's just like I'm giving an opinion about something and showing you how to use it. I mean, it's not all that different from one to the other. So, that individual who mentioned that, yeah, you're onto something here. That's a very good point. And yes, that does actually work sometimes. And we do that sometimes. Like, yeah, if I put this out as a review, it won't do well, but I'll just do a tutorial instead and then watch it just go crazy. It's just weird.
Mhm.
But
Yep. But
yeah.
what's the next tip for Home Assistant? Or did you cover them all?
Those are the main ones off the top of my head
Okay.
because I do have more, but the problem then becomes I'm overloading you with talking about something that I think is best done by
Visual.
seeing it.
There
But with these tips, I think if you take this far enough and just use your imagination, these
now,
things sound simple, but you could really go crazy with this and do some pretty fun things.
but I wanna mention there's something you did that I was hoping you'd bring up. That's why I didn't know if
Oh,
you had it
what is
listed.
that? Maybe I
Uh,
forgot.
yeah, I know. Well, you have the tool to control your fans now. I think it was the one I sent you.
Oh, right. The
Just mention the
the
device.
IR blaster.
IR blaster. This is a
Yeah.
cool thing, and me and Jay were in a discussion because he's like, "Yeah, I wish I could control these fans." I'm like, "Actually," and,
It happens all the time.
so
Like,
explain the IR blaster a little bit. I think it's kinda neat.
so if you're like me, and I would, and maybe you'll see this in the background if you're watching the video version, I have a box of remotes. It's often
Yeah.
in the background. It's like a little wooden box, and you'll see like 4 or 5, maybe 10 remotes sticking up because that's how many remotes I have in here. I mean, LED lights and the TVs and all these other things. And it gets complicated because the ceiling fans, which I also put in Home Assistant, one of them, when you power it on with a smart plug, the fan doesn't come on. It just has power. You have to grab your remote and then turn it on. And that's annoying because when I hit,
I wanna press
a smart
buttons.
plug, I want it to just come on. I don't want to have to press a button on the remote. So that's when we got to the conversation. You're like, yeah, you can actually just buy an IR blaster and program it with the remote codes, and it could do all that for you. And sure enough, it works. So basically, the IR blaster is something that you add to your network, your Wi-Fi network, and then Home Assistant is able to pick it up. And then what you do is you train the IR blaster with as many remote codes as you want. Any device you want. There's a video I followed on YouTube that was made this annoying process stupid simple to the point where I just blindly did what the person did and shown on the screen. And sure enough, it absolutely worked. So I went through every remote. I programmed every button, and this is the downside. You have to do this one button at a time. So if you have two TVs in the same room, you have to set the power button for one, program that, set the power button for the other, program that. And then the up arrow, then the down arrow, then the left arrow, then the right arrow. And it gets really tedious because you're creating a script behind every button. But the fan only has a few buttons, like maybe 4, turn on, turn off, circulate on, circulate off, speed up, speed down. So then I create an automation that waits 5 seconds after I hit the smart plug, presses the power button, it waits 4 seconds or so, and then it turns on circulate, and then it cranks up the speed. And that's I was able to do that with the IR blaster, and then I was able to program the television and my monitor. My actual computer monitor has a remote. So now I can turn on the computer monitor with Home Assistant and access the menu and do everything without grabbing the remote. So I did some initial testing and it works really, really well. So that was a great tip, and it actually enabled me to get rid of some of the things I had on my dashboard that I didn't need.
Yeah, it's just a nice little simplicity there for,
Yep.
I thought it was cool when it was a discussion me and Jay had of why do you have a box of remotes that led to him ordering a device and getting it all working. So,
Yep.
there's really so much you can automate with it. That's what we wanted to share with you, on this. I think it's such a directly related to our, the uh, topic of home lab in general and automating all the things and you being in charge of the
Yep.
automation, you hosting your own cloud at home. uh, that's really what this just it's such a nice alignment there. But nonetheless, leave some comments, had some feedback for us on this topic because we
Mhm.
like hearing from you on it. We have a few more things planned we're working on, that are going to be back to some of the more technical things, so we just didn't have each of those topics quite ready yet. But do check out Jay's recent videos on the series Open Stack or
OpenStack.
OpenShift.
Yep.
Yeah,
OpenStack. And
open
OpenShift is part of it too,
yeah,
the
OpenShift is part
community
of it
about
too. So
OpenStack, yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Well, we do have one question we can answer real quick. Do you recommend using the latest kernel in Proxmox, Jay?
Well, the question I think is better asked, is there a feature that you wanna utilize? That's the reason to use a newer kernel. If you're asking about performance improvements, I mean, there's always going to be performance improvements. I'm not sure if there's gonna be anything you'll notice, but when it comes to servers, I'm not a fan of swapping out kernels unless there's a compatibility issue or maybe a bug that a newer kernel version fixes. Another thing with the newer kernel version is that if you have a newer motherboard, you might not even have a choice because hardware support is tied to it. So if you install something and then find out like you have no NIC, you do because you're looking right at your network card. You know it exists. It's not a figment of your imagination, but when you go on your server, it's just not an interface that's there, and that's often because that network card might just be newer than the kernel was. In that case, you have no choice. You have to use a newer kernel. And I don't know if that's why they provide the newer kernel, but I wouldn't doubt it because Debian is notorious for having really old kernels with hardware compatibility that leaves a lot to be desired. So even Debian users will use Debian backports to get a newer kernel, much in the same way in Proxmox you could do the same. So I would say if you have a reason or something that's not quite working, go ahead and try it. But if everything is working, I would just leave it well enough alone.
Yeah,
That's what I would say
ain't
about that.
ain't broke, don't fix it.
Another question that was asked is where did I put the IR blaster? It's in a temporary location right now, but what I plan on doing is installing it right in the ceiling, just having it kind of poking out of the ceiling so it's kind of looking down and then it can get to everything. So being line of sight means that you are not going to install one IR blaster and be able to use it in every room of your house. You will have to have one in the den if you want one there, in your office or wherever. They're not super expensive, but also money doesn't grow on trees. So you want to make good use of the ones you have. But if you have a lot of devices in one room, then it's a good candidate for automating that. But you will need multiple ones especially if you have different floors, different rooms. So it has to be line of sight. But in the ceiling, I have a drop ceiling, so I could just carve a little hole in the ceiling tile, just poke it down. It's easy, and that way, it's right there, easy to access. If I need to unplug it or reset it, which I still haven't yet had to do, but that way I could see everything without maybe my monitor bouncing the signal off and not getting to the TV, which would be annoying. So, or the fan in my case.
Yep,
So yeah,
absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Hit us up at feedback@thehomelab.show. And we're looking forward to seeing you next week.
absolutely.
Take care. Oh, home assistant high availability. There's a fun topic.
I was hoping we wouldn't miss that one because the acronym be HAHA, Home
Haha.
Assistant High Availability. We need to make that an actual term if it's not already. Maybe it already is,
Yeah,
but it's the
haha
first time
mode.
I heard of it, but that's pretty funny.
Yeah, we're definitely haha mode for home assistant.
Yes.
I like that. All right. Thanks, everyone.